If you haven't heard about Anchor and its easiest way to make a podcast, let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
What's up, mi gente? I'm your girl, Lisette Carter. Welcome to the Rookie American podcast. You'll notice that the quality is off a little today because I forgot my mic and I don't feel like going to get it. So, with anybody that has kids, you know that sometimes you just can't work at home. And so I can't record at home because of all the chaos. So I decided to record in my car today without the mic, and so that's why you see a little bit of a difference in the quality, but the information is still going to be mind-blowing, mind you. So today I'm excited to start our history series. I cannot tell you how excited I am about this series. Your mind, your world is going to be rocked. And I say that because the things that I've learned within the past couple years of really studying and diving into history, reading autobiographies, reading books by historians, reading books on socialism, communism, just a lot of study, I have grown a deep appreciation and excitement for this information. And the reason why is because not that I didn't appreciate it. I mean, I really didn't care when I was in school, when I was in high school or elementary school or even college. I didn't care much about it. But what I did learn didn't really match what I'm learning now. And I find it pretty crazy that, you know, you have teachers that have history degrees and maybe they've read books like The Godless Constitution, where these two professors decided to write about why God doesn't exist in the Constitution without zero footnotes. And they just you read the back of the book and it says, yeah, we got our information. You should just trust us. Like, and if you've read the Constitution, you know that it's completely filled. If you've read the original intent, or understand the original intent behind the Constitution itself, where the forefathers came from, the founding fathers, where, you know, their backgrounds, what they were doing, and you know that they've written, the way that we text is the same way that those guys wrote letters. I mean, they wrote thousands of letters backing up. I mean, you could go back and read them. They're all online. You can read them yourself, and it's evident that God is all up in the Constitution. That was all up in their lives. So it's pretty fascinating when when you're talking to someone right now in 2021 about history, and they really know very, very little about what really went on, and then everything is like political theater. Everything gets politicized to the point where historical monuments and historical days that were observed are completely dismissed or desecrated because of hearsay. And some of that hearsay we're going to talk about today is the story of the history of Christopher Columbus, Cristobal Colón. Okay. Now, all I knew about Christopher Columbus when I was growing up, because I grew up in Puerto Rico. I grew up here in the States and in Puerto Rico. And really, the only thing I would really hear about him was that he was a genocidal maniac. And there was like rift between Aguada and Aguadilla, which is like the two towns. I grew up in Aguadilla, and the Aguada is the next town over. You know, which town did he really arrive to first in Puerto Rico? And that's all I really knew, that there was beef with those towns. They both claimed that Christopher Columbus landed there first. And that's all I knew. And that he was a Spaniard. Someone said that he was a Spaniard and that he got funding to go find a new land. And so when I really dug deep into learning about Christopher Columbus, the first person that I heard a different story from was an acquaintance that I had from real estate, who he owns a construction company / real estate company. And he was telling me about all these facts about Christopher Columbus. And I said, what are you talking about? I didn't even know that. And so I went and I dug. I didn't even ask. I don't know if I asked him where he found that information. I think he was just like, well, I just looked it up. And so I went ahead and started looking it up, and I started reading a few books, and I found a bunch of different resources on the truth about Christopher Columbus. And I say all that to tell you that it's important to know this information and to share it, because right now in the past year, 2020, they were beheading Christopher Columbus statues. I mean, they beheaded a statue in Boston because they claim that this guy just was a racist. He was a human trafficker. He came to plunder off of America's goods, to kill all of the Indians and Native Americans that were here, and to seize the land and to plant the Spanish / Italian flag, and to say this land is mine and y'all can't have it anymore. That's definitely not what happened. Okay. So I'm gonna dive right in. This is so exciting. So when Christopher Columbus he's Italian. I know most of you probably already know that. So this dude is Italian, and he is also he's like a biblical scholar. He knows the Bible front to back. He was raised, I don't know if he was raised Christian, but I know he read the Bible regularly. He actually has a book, journals all of the scriptures that he used to kind of motivate and help him on his journey to spread the gospel. And so that's his original intent, was to spread the gospel to Asia. And the reason why was because he believed in their time that Jesus was coming back soon. And so he wanted to find a way, not just a route to Asia, but he wanted to find a way to spread the gospel out there. He approached Portugal, the king and queen of Portugal. They said, nah, bro, we're good. We're not doing that. Then he approached Spain. I believe it was King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who they worked for about a year together, going back and forth about this voyage. And after a year, they decided to fund the voyage for him. And so the original intent was to find the route to Asia to spread the gospel. Also, he told them that if he were to make any profits, because there were people at the time, the natives didn't care for gold. They didn't care for that, so they would give it away. But he didn't want to just take it. It's a lot like the Puritans, like the Pilgrims when they came here. And a lot of you don't know this, but they didn't just take land or take stuff from these guys. They would exchange it for something. And so his philosophy was, I'm not just going to take it, I'm going to exchange it for something fair. And any profits that I make for that is to fund the voyage to get Jerusalem back from the Muslim Crusades. Now, back in the day, in those days, they had Christian crusades and they had Muslim crusades. And the Muslim crusades were specifically targeting countries that were Jewish and Christian countries. So like Jerusalem, Israel, all that. And so he wanted to, at the time, the Muslims had control of that area. And so he wanted to get it back into Christian hands before Jesus came back. And so he had all that backed up by scripture. And so that was his goal. So when he came, the first place that he landed in 1492 was El Salvador. El Salvador, right? Also known as San Salvador. And when he landed there, the first thing that he did was he knelt down and he thanked God, and he named it Holy Savior, which is El Salvador. And so when you look at like all of those Caribbean islands, they all have Christian names like St. John. They all have saint in front of it. That was because as he got around to those areas, he would give them biblical names. Okay. Now, when he first landed, the first people that he encountered were the Tainos, which is where where I come from. I actually look like, I would like to think, like a Taina. Like if you look at me, if Puerto Ricans are like African, European, and Taino, you would automatically look at me and say, that girl's definitely a Taina. So it's kind of like, if you don't know what Taina is, it's like a native, like the native people of the land, like Native American, that kind of a feel. And so the Tainos were the natives of that in the Caribbean. And they were very warm. He said they were the warmest people. And all of this is I'll give you the resources after. All of this is backed up by documented. Like, there are historians that have documents, have journals, have accounts by doctors that rode with him on what they saw. Okay, because again, their letters were like texting for us is how their letters flowed in. They have so much evidence. And so that he first met the Tainos, they were the loving, the most kind people ever. And the Tainos warned him about another tribe called the Caribs, and they were also called Cannibs as well. And that Cannibs is short for cannibals. And so this tribe was extremely violent. And what they would do is they would find the Tainos and they would eat all of the men. They would kill and eat everybody, but they would save the women. And the women, they would put them in an enslaved camp and they would rape them so that they could conceive children and then eat their children. It was like a farm. And so like a cannibalism farm. Like, they would leave sometimes for like years at a time to come back and then eat the kids. That's how this tribe operated. And so when Christopher Columbus left, because he came 4 times. So the first time he came was in 1492. He left, and then when the second time that he had left a couple people behind. And so when he came back, that's when really they started colonizing. Like, he started bringing back more boats and more people. There was no one there. And it was all they found were like bones, because the Caribs had come in and attacked the Tainos and had some of his guys in there too. And they were completely wiped out. So he got word that it was them. And he went out this is on his second journey back. He went out to rescue the Taino women that were in the camp, that were enslaved. And so at this point, that's another topic as well. When it comes to slavery, he came and he brought a bunch of slaves. That's actually not factual. 20 to 40% of the slaves were already happening in the nation, in the Caribbean, and they were enslaving each other. Like the Tainos and all those guys, they were all enslaving each other. So, he went back, he came back, he rescued the Taino women, and he did what he could for the people. He tried to live peacefully among them. So what happened was, as he brought more people, because he was Italian, the Spaniards had a different philosophy. The Spaniards did not like the approach that he had. They didn't like that he was a Christian. They didn't like that he approached them, let's trade. If they give you gold, you trade that. You don't just take land, you have to give them something for it. They didn't like that approach. They just wanted they were there for selfish reasons. They were there for gold. They were there to kill the people. They were there for very different reasons. So as more conquerors came, before or after Columbus, because there were also Vikings that came way before Columbus. But Christopher Columbus himself was not involved in that. And his writings and letters that's evident in his writings. So he left, he came back a third time, and he brought more people. So every single time he came, he left, He brought more and more people with him. Now, the second time that he had come, he had rebuked, or he had, not rebuked, but he had confronted the Spaniards that were mistreating the Tainos, the natives. And he would punish them because the king and queen had made Christopher Columbus the governor of the new land. And so on paper, he had that authority. But if you're bringing hundreds of Spaniards with you and you're the only Italian and you have no backup, there's only so much that you can do. There's only so much that you can control. So during his second voyage, he had told them, you guys can't do this. And he said, this is not okay. You cannot treat people this way. And so they started to have a little bit of animosity towards him. They did not like him whatsoever. So when he came back the third time, they pretty much handcuffed him. The Spaniards that were here, they handcuffed him. They mistreated him, and they sent him back to Spain. And they accused him of doing everything that they were doing. Now, if you live in 2021, you know that there's some familiar, I can't say the word. I can't say that. There's something familiar about that, right? Where somebody has been accused of something, but the accuser is the one that's doing the same thing. That's what happened in this case. And so they accused him of mistreating the natives. They accused him of taking, gold. They accused him of rape. They accused him of all kinds of things. And so when he went back to the king and queen in chains, he got acquitted because they realized that none of this stuff was true. So he decided to come a fourth time. And the fourth time that he came, he actually ended up on the coast and somewhere in Jamaica. And he was shipwrecked for a year and ended up going back to Europe and got sick and didn't make it because of the types of conditions that he went through. His body couldn't take it. And so now that is literally the story, right? It's a lot longer than that, but I condensed it for you. And what's mind-blowing is that people don't take the time they just believe whatever one person is telling them about history. They don't take the time to go and verify the original documents or verify the people that are actually saying, where did you get that information? Where did you learn that from? And then going in, with the internet, you can learn whatever you need to. You can find all kinds of things on the internet. So it's a matter of actually taking the initiative and going to research these things. Christopher Columbus was not the person that people claim him to be. And Washington Irving actually said this. He used to be like a literary figure. But this is what he said about the people kind of rewriting history. There is a certain meddlesome spirit which, in the garb of learned research, goes prying about the traces of history, casting down its monuments, and marring and mutilating its fairest trophies. Care should be taken to vindicate great names from such pernicious erudition or destructive pseudo-academic attacks. Its defeats one of the most salutary or wholesome purposes of history, that of furnishing examples of what human genius and laudable enterprise may accomplish. This basically describes it in the footnote after. It says, this certainly describes the often irrational efforts today to destroy Columbus and diminish his genuine accomplishments. How crazy is it that somebody who had intended to just put Israel back in the hands of Jews or in the hands of Christians, and someone that wanted to spread the gospel to Asia, and there's historical documentation on on his writings, on his intent to do that. And today it has been warped into, Christopher Columbus is I mean, you've heard the things. I don't have to tell you. If you have the internet, you know that some of the things that they say. And it's disheartening almost to see that this kind of education is in academia right now. It's in the schools. It's what your kids are learning. They're literally learning that, Christopher Columbus took slaves back with him from Europe, when really the several Taino tribes volunteered to travel back to Spain, including like a chief. Columbus was an extremely peaceful guy, and how his image has been completely tarnished within just even like the school system. And I remember having a conversation with, I was learning a lot of this stuff, and I was having a conversation with my husband. And we had a guest over, and I was telling him how excited I was to learn all of this stuff. And the guest completely was like, no, that didn't happen. That didn't happen. That's not what I learned in school. And, after I reiterated, well, this is what I'm learning, and I'm actually going back to make sure to look up the information and verify it. Nope, that's not true. I just don't understand what, like, you repeat something long enough, like repetition is a convincing argument, no? Like you can literally repeat something long enough and people will believe it to be true. But then when you hear the contrary, when you hear the other side of that, you completely disregard it whatsoever. And I guess, you just completely, you shut it down completely because you've just heard it so many times that it's just become factual to you, and there's no open-minded discussions about what happened, where did you find that information, who wrote that, what's their background, none of that. And I wanted to bring light to stories like these. That's why I wanted to have the history series. I wanted to shed light on them because I'm glad that they're being recorded, because I want to be able to share that with my daughter as well. And for her to understand, hey, if you look into history and get the proper information, you can be properly educated. And I can't even tell you, adults, like literally, where'd you find that information? I've never heard of that. My kids aren't learning that. What kind of world are we living in when we're twisting and twisting and turning everything, especially to make everything secular? You've got to ask your questions, like, why are they removing God? You realize this entire story, God was completely removed from it when you teach it in schools. And there are scriptures backed by scriptures that Columbus spoke of as he was, going about his journey. Psalm 65:5 was one of them. And that was, Luke 23:46. There's so many scriptures that he made a point to highlight or to write about that fueled him to go out and spread the gospel to the nations. And it's insane how I just don't understand. I know I'm kind of going in circles here, but I just don't understand how we got to this point where something so pure, can be completely twisted and diluted. For what? So that people can learn to hate America. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day, right? Why else would you remove God and accuse, Columbus of the same things that the Spaniards accused him of? Why else? So that you can learn to grow and hate your nation, so you can vote a certain way. That's the only reason why. So you can believe that there really is division here. There is no division. There's no reason to hate your country because you think Christopher Columbus killed people when he came here. He didn't even do that. So that's where I'm at mentally, to be honest. And I probably have to edit this video because I'm kind of rambling. But I just wanted to tell you the truth about the fascinating story of Christopher Columbus and where we come from. And that's part of our history. And if you didn't know, now you know. If you don't know, now you know. And I really hope that you enjoyed this quick podcast. I'm excited for the next one. We're going to learn about Pocahontas. And no, she didn't marry John Smith. No, she did not. Not the Disney the Disney version. So the Pocahontas that's another fascinating story. And we're going to work our way up. We're going to talk about pivotal moments where free black men had done amazing things in the 1700s. We're going to talk about George Washington. We're going to talk about all kinds of things. It's going to be great. But you know what? We're going to leave God where he's supposed to be in the midst of all those stories, because that's literally the most important element of what I'm going to be taught. It's the most important element of history. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I know I got to edit it. I'm kind of bummed, but I hate editing these things, but I hope you got something out of it. Make sure you tune in to next Thursday, where we're going to learn about Pocahontas and the truth behind her story. I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for tuning in. And hey, have a great rest of your week. Don't forget to subscribe. The resources that were utilized for today's podcast were An American Story by David and Tim Barton, anything from the Wall Builders website, Google, and also The Book of Prophecies by Christopher Columbus.